Okay, good morning, everyone. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about a case study, but I think I've skipped past the front page, which doesn't really matter, but there we go. Talk about a case study called Access for All. So this is rail stations in the UK, and Access for All is quite a substantial programme investment funded by the Department for Transport. So what I'm going to talk about is very briefly the study objectives and what we did within the study. I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail within that. We'll talk about some of the key research results that we found, and when we talk about key results, that's actually some of the financial, the BCR, the core number. So we'll talk about that and some of the information about how that was collected and what that means. Some general lessons, and then I had some questions posed after I distributed my paper, and I'm actually going to start the Q&A session with me answering some of those questions that have already been posed. That's quite a good way of just getting that going. So just in terms of what the point of the study was, so it's basically to quantify the benefits of this Access for All programme. And the reason for doing that is so that the DFT can get funding to continue the programme. So it's all about getting funding. And we can talk a bit more afterwards if you like about that, the process, the hoops that you have to go through in the UK. And what we did within the study is we looked at the volumes of people using the stations, and we looked particularly at rail card use. So one of the types of rail card is a disabled person's rail card, and obviously that's an indicator of the number of disabled people using the station. We did some site visits and audits to have a look around, see how actually accessible they are after the improvements were made. And one of the things I was doing is sharing some of the results of that. We did some classified counts, so counting people. This actually was quite interesting about people walking with mobility aids. Well, that's quite interesting because one of the issues if you're trying to count people is how do you identify what proportion have a mobility issue. So that's quite interesting. And then the final point is the economic appraisal. And I should say that our study covered 6 stations, and they represented a cross-section of the total programme of stations which had been improved. So they were designed to be representative of all the stations. So they included a variety, small and large, Scotland, Wales, England, commuter stations, more town centre type stations. So it was a bit of a range. There's only 6, so there's only a certain amount you can do within that. But I mean that was the idea. And I think it's important to recognise that we didn't select them to be the best. If you know what I mean. We selected them to be representative. That was the concept. So I mentioned that we did these classified counts. So we counted people using the station, and we counted people using the lifts. It's obviously a good indicator. And then what we tried to do within these, when we're counting people, is identify mobility impaired. So that's people with a walking aid, for example, but also people who are sort of frail or elderly. And so there's a little bit of subjectivity within that. But what we did, we have videos, and we were able to so we had people from the videos classifying people into different categories, and we could go back to the videos if we were unsure and check how they were doing it and moderate. But it's reasonably scientific, reasonably good, although clearly there was a little bit of subjectivity. The real difficult one is hearing impairments. I mean, trying to spot someone with a hearing aid nowadays, that's tough. Actually, to be honest, my wife has a hearing aid, and it's literally you can't see it. I mean, and then obviously encumbered is the easy one, I suppose. They've got push chair or they've got heavy luggage. So, but we were counting people in that category as well. And then everybody else we just called unencumbered, for want of a better term. So these are the 6 stations, and just a tiny bit of information about what the main type of works were. And you can see a key thing is lifts. So these are all stations where to get from one platform or another, you basically need a lift. I mean, it's worth just pointing out, and you're probably aware of this, but you know, in the UK, most stations are built in the 19th century. You know, so there was a discussion yesterday about, you know, new versus retrofitting. I mean, in terms of UK stations, it's nearly always retrofitting. That's the basic issue that you've got. And I guess the Victorians just didn't care about people with disabilities. I mean, you know. So yes, it's quite expensive. And the things that are mentioned there to focus on the big infrastructure items. So there are the complementary elements as well, and some of that will come out. I've got some photos coming up of these stations. So in the site audits, what we did is we tried to walk through the station, look at different aspects of the disability and the accessibility from different types of disability. Again, that point was made. And we're trying to pick up, basically how well have the improvements been implemented. And we did come up with, some issues, to be honest, that the implementation wasn't always perfect. And, it's all just tried to highlight a few things there. I mean, there's sort of just at the bottom right, there's no dropped curb at the entrance, which would seem like an obvious thing to have done. One of the things that is kind of strange is the top left, the big picture of the lift. It's actually quite hard to know it's a lift. I mean, and if you walk, as you come into the entrance, you just see this great big, just looks like a footbridge, really. Sometimes the entrance to lifts are the back of the staircase. So that was one of the, and then the signs, there's a sign, pointing to the lift, but it's quite small and not, So that's one of the things that I'll bring out later. Actually, come up yesterday is awareness. I mean, you wouldn't think that awareness of lift was going to be an issue, I must admit, but. So that was Bridgend. Huddersfield, very different station. Bridgend is in Wales. Huddersfield is in a sort of town in, sort of quite a nice market town in Yorkshire. And you can see here the lift is glass surround, so that makes it much more visible. And actually, to be honest, I think it's a lot more attractive as well. Yeah, Mark, you probably know Huddersfield. It is a nice station. It's a nice town, a nice station. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Maybe they're underselling it a bit. So the bottom left, that's a kind of an example of there's a lift there, but actually you have to investigate a bit to realise there's a lift there. And you see the footbridge. You have to. I think you have to actually go there to really appreciate some of these things. But that photo does show a little bit. This is not a particularly attractive sort of footbridge. It's a bit dark and not very inviting and not very well lit. Then that does, there's other examples where things are much better. So we talked about tactile paving yesterday. Some quite good tactile paving shown there, and accessible ticket machines. And that's very good. On the left, that's a much more inviting, sort of bright, airy-looking route along over the railway, along the footbridge. Again, we've got some accessible ticket counters, which is great. And all these, all these things add up, don't they? And then Vauxhall is a very big station just outside London, very big interchange station used by lots of commuters, lots of tourists, and it's a very, very, very busy station. But that's quite well done. So that just gives you a bit of a feel for the places we're talking about. So in terms of the numbers, volumes of people. So what this shows is that disabled users are about 1% of all the passengers. So very small proportion. That's the reality. The highest was Bridge End, which was 2%. So even that, it's not big numbers. But the people with luggage and pushchairs and so on, the encumbered, is a much bigger figure, up to 7%. So that, that's worth bearing in mind. In terms of the lift usage, so overall we have 5% of station users using lifts. And, so 1% are disabled, 5% using the lifts. I mean, clearly what's going on is that lots of other people are using the lifts. And so most users are actually just, what we call it unencumbered, just ordinary people. And, there's 23% of lift users are encumbered. So this is just showing that although the lifts are put in because of the people with disabilities, disabled people, that's the main incentive. Actually, in terms of volumes of use, volumes of beneficiaries, they're a minority. There is a question, though, to be honest, about how much benefit they're gaining. You'd imagine that someone that has mobility difficulty is getting more benefit from the lift, using the lift, than an unencumbered person. So that's, again, something to bear in mind. It's not just about volumes of people, although, we'll see actually the way the evaluation works, it is kind of a bit of a numbers game, but so it misses a lot of these subtleties. So we come back to this awareness issue. So we asked people about awareness of changes, and you can see quite high levels of non-awareness. Overall, we've got just only 41% are aware, said they're aware of changes. I mean, there is an issue that they may not have associated, say, the lift with a change. We recognise that. So that, but even so, when we talked to the, within the interviews we did, I talked to the interviewers, and I actually we visited these stations when the surveys were going on, and it was clear that in the interview you start talking about how to use the lift. And I said, "Oh, what lift?" It's even though it's just there. So there was definitely, there's definitely an issue. And then the impact. So this is the key number we're looking at. The key impact is have the improvements, have the lifts and so on, have they increased the extent to which you use the station, and that's what we're really interested in. And we've got people, saying they are increasing their use of the stations, and again that includes this unencumbered group. I mean, it's a very small increase, but it's of course a small increase from a very big number. So that's, yeah, please.
Is that just the people who were aware of the changes?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a smaller proportion of the whole.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's good. No, that's a good point. Yes. But so of the wheelchair users, and I guess they're your core target. I mean, they're less than 1%, but they are the core group. I mean, there's a notice, quite a significant increase. And we've got two categories: significant and slight. We just tend to ignore the slight and focus on the significant in terms of when we're getting onto the actual evaluation. And this is quite an interesting question. I don't quite know how to. It doesn't feed into the evaluation, but it was interesting to see that people think that the improvements benefit other people. And I think that does that. I mean, it comes back to some of the things we were talking yesterday, isn't it, about society and so actually seeing the benefits, more benefits to other people than themselves. But that's a good thing. It's not in the evaluation, but I think it's a positive thing. So in terms of the economic appraisal, so it all comes down to the BCR, the single number, 2.4, and it needs, what we're looking for is something noticeably over 1, and that's what it is, which is great. So that enabled getting this figure out. It was very helpful in terms of DFT getting more funding for continuing this programme. We did some sensitivity tests because there's a lot of factors which are uncertain, and that showed a range of 1.1. So even in the worst case, you know, it was still positive, so that was really good. I mean, I say worst case, and we only looked at one negative thing at a time. If we'd have combined all the negative things, then you know, it wouldn't have been so good. But you know, so that was really positive. And the 19.5, that's because we then within that we included the benefits to this unencumbered group, which were excluded from the core benefit evaluation, because of this issue about, well, how much actually are they benefiting really? And it just and when you're doing these things, I mean, the basic principle is you take a conservative approach, and what you want to do is to get the number through without people challenging it. And, you know, so if it looks like you've included things which are a bit on, you know, if someone's looking at it, they think, oh, well, they're trying too hard. There's something, you know, this is not right, kind of thing. So it's better to be conservative and show that you've done it properly, and then, you know, it will tend to get through much more easily. Now, I want to take the third point down: considerable variation between stations. So there were some stations, in fact, 2 of the stations where the BCR was less than 1. So at those stations, you wouldn't have put in this. You wouldn't have implemented the programme. So I think that, you know, there's an issue I want to come back to there, I think. And the key factors, now what's driving the numbers is the number of, is the volume of people using a station and the cost. And the key, you know, and when it's talking about number of people using the station, obviously the key groups are the disabled and encumbered users, and particularly the encumbered. I mean, that's the bigger number. And everything else is, you know, relatively marginal in terms of their the impacts. Those are the 2 key driving factors: numbers and costs. And, you know, everyone completely recognises that the BCR, I mean, there's a rule book, that, you know, WebTag it's called, and you have to follow the rule book. And, you know, that's completely, I think it's completely reasonable. If you're trying to compare different sorts of schemes, this is a point we talked about yesterday, is that what's this used for? Are you comparing one rail scheme with another rail scheme, one access for all project to another access for all project, or are you comparing road with rail, with bicycling, active modes? For DFT, they use this to across all modes, across all the sort of projects they do. So it is quite important, I think, to have something that has a common base. But everyone recognises it's incomplete. It's kind of what you do with that, and I think that comes back again to the fact that, yes, there's all sorts of things you can measure and quantify. How much effort do you put into quantifying everything? Because if you put it in for this, you know, if you include it in this for this scheme for rail, you have to include in everything else, to be fair. So it's, you know, it's a kind of, yeah. So in a way, if you have it more focused, it makes life easier for everyone, even though some sort of scheme is quite likely to lose out. And actually, schemes for disabled people are quite likely to be in that category. I agree that, you know, there's some specific benefits that wouldn't come up in any other sort of scheme. So some of the things that we didn't take account of are this whole issue of social inclusion and opportunity and capability. That is not included in this framework, and the fact the population is ageing. So we've got this situation now, but really you should be, and actually economic appraisal is over, you know, 30 years. You should be taking into account the fact that the population is ageing, and so the need is going to increase. But it didn't take that into account. I mean, you know, so. So in terms of some of the key findings, you know, we've talked about this already. Better information and the sort of combining hard and soft factors is really important. To be honest, it's a message that we keep as a consultant. We keep trying to drive. we keep saying this. I've been saying this for 20 years at least, and it just seems to be quite hard because I think it's just different people doing these different things. I think that's the problem. Different organisations, different people. So getting them to work, these things happen together. You know, if you're an engineer, you're putting in a lift. You're not the sort of person that's into sort of communications and marketing and so on. And you know, as we've said, key finding is that it's the disabled people are they probably benefit more, but they're in terms of the numbers, they're the minority of the beneficiaries. And it comes back actually to the tourism point, isn't it? That tourists are probably one of the biggest beneficiaries, in fact. So these are the recommendations we made in this report to the DFT. Is we recommended the programme should be continued. We recommended there should be communications programme. We actually suggested that you should set aside an amount of money. We put in 10%. I mean, it almost doesn't, something, an amount of money put aside, which is a percentage of the infrastructure amount for these complementary measures. And there's, within the UK rail industry, and I'm sure it may not be that different in other countries, there's lots of different organisations trying to work together, and actually that could always be done better. So the company operating a station needs to work better with the company operating the trains, basically. And then in terms of general lessons, I think I mentioned this already, so there's combining hard and soft measures. I think, again, what comes across is that designing for people with poor mobility, poor sight, it actually benefits everybody. It's better design. We talked about there's some exceptions, tactile paving is not perhaps ideal for some group, but in general, designing people, a good accessible design is good for everybody in general. Again, this is something that came up yesterday. I mentioned it again about the weakest link. So it's all very well improving the station, but how do you get from the station onto the train, and et cetera, et cetera. Got to worry about all that kind of thing. And again, this idea of people, there's benefit in people believing that they're in a caring society, and I think this was mentioned yesterday. It's nice for people to think that they're in a station, they can see that this is for everybody, and that actually gives a bit of a warm feeling, if you like. For most people. Okay, so there were some questions that were posed. So without before and after data, so the big thing is numbers of people. So counting, observing, just people using. That seemed to be the, if you're going to do one thing, that seemed to be the thing. And to be honest, actually, it's also the audits. When we actually visited these stations to audit, actually, that was really important as well. Is the data in the UK? The census data is a very good source. There is information about long-term illness and disability in the census, and that goes down to very small geographic areas. So in the UK, goes down to outward areas, and the average population of an outward area is about 380. So they are pretty small. It's very good. It's a very good source. It's once every 10 years, but it's a very good source. So, right, a whole journey. So this programme was just about the station. And in fact, I'm doing a project at the moment for the rail industry. It's connected with stations, a sort of a vision for stations and a framework for stations. And actually, one of the things we're really trying to promote is the idea of a station as part of a community, as part of the local area. So the station doesn't end at the station, where the entrance is. It ends a bit further out. So and you break down some of the barriers between the station and its hinterland. But at the moment, there's I'd say an invisible line, but there's actually a visible line between the station and the rest of the world, and that's a virtual barrier in a lot of ways, and that is an issue definitely. Yes, and I guess in terms of the point, do you have any thoughts on how to quantify different elements of accessible station design? I think it comes back to what's the weakest link, actually, and that's the thing you need to focus on. And in terms of how important are these BCRs in the UK? They are pretty important. They are. Other people have different views and different experiences. They come across to me as a hoop you have to jump through. But there will already be people who are supporting and opposing a project, and so the supporters will be looking at trying to get the positives out of BCR, and if it comes out fine, I'll be saying this is good. But the opponents of a project will be looking at the BCR, and if it's not, the answer they'll sort of dig in and try and find why it's wrong. That's, and also there are. I noticed that there's an uneven playing field with these BCRs. And in general terms, infrastructure projects have an advantage over soft measures type projects. You can get away. So a road scheme, a BCR of 2 would be seen as very good, but for a kind of soft measures, a behaviour change type measure, you have to get up to 5 to 1 to be seen to be good. It's an odd thing. I don't know if other people have that experience, but that's certainly my experience. Have findings been used by local and national? Well, so this, I think one of the issues is, so this work has been used for the Access for All programme. I don't think it's been used for elsewhere. So I think that is an issue, and I think that's probably quite a common factor that the word silos was mentioned. I mean, it's kind of this is done for this, and the people who are involved with this, they only work on this, rail, and this sort of project. So, unfortunately, yes, it doesn't necessarily get across. Although, having said that, I mean, quite often what we find is that within the organisations, things don't get cross-fertilised, but actually it's the consultancies like I work for that actually do that cross-fertilisation, because we're involved with lots of different things, lots of different departments, lots of different organisations. So it's quite often we have a better understanding, better knowledge of what's happening than the people in the organisation who tend to be quite focused on their particular area. So that was our presentation. That's the first question. So any other questions?
Well done.